Good afternoon. It's a particular pleasure and privilege to be here with you today. Now, we've all heard that kind of a greeting thousands of times to the point that it's tiresome and perhaps even has a smack of insincerity to it. Please believe me, when a recipient of an organ transplant says to you that it is a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today, we really mean it. Now, I've been invited here today to tell my story, and I'll do so in just a moment. It's important to understand, though, that I did not come here simply to tell the story of one man. I'm here today to say thank you. Thank you to all of you for what you have done, not only on my behalf, but for all of those donors, recipients of both tissue and organ transplant, where you have forever impacted their lives and the lives of their loved ones. My story on transplant begins almost exactly 13 years ago. It was the last week of March, 1998, and life was good. I had a loving family, good health, beautiful home, thriving business. In fact, that weekend we were scheduled to move the business to larger quarters. Well, I got up early that Monday morning to go to work, and my wife said to me, "Honey," now, any of you who have been married, when you hear the lead-in being "honey," a little jolt goes through you and you're waiting for the punchline, right? Well, my punchline that I received was, "You better exercise a little more. Your tummy's getting round." And I couldn't argue with her. That was the worst part of it. There she was, 20 feet across in a darkened room, and she could see better than I could standing in front of the mirror. I don't know how that works. And I couldn't figure out why this could possibly be happening. After all, I exercised a lot, ran a mile or two every day with our Labrador retriever. But the next day, the tummy was rounded. And the next day at the doctor, I had nothing to tell him. I'd never had anything worse than the common cold, never been in a hospital. But when he called 2 days later on Friday, he said, "Your liver is in serious trouble. Report to UCLA Hospital, 6 a.m. Monday morning." Well, that weekend, with skin color of varying from yellow to green, bright orange eyeballs, a stomach out to here, I oversaw the move of the business and reported sharp at 6 a.m. Monday morning. They weighed me in. I now weighed 25 pounds more than I had a few days previous at the doctor. Soon I was walking down the hall with an escort to my room, and I had over my arm one of those flimsy little gowns. If you've ever been in a hospital, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, you know, the kind that doesn't quite fit behind. That was going to be my wardrobe for longer than I could possibly imagine at that point. The rest of the day was a parade of doctors and nurses until finally I met my new best friend, a gentleman that I'd never met before, Dr. Leonard Goldstein. And he explained to me that my liver was in total failure. They had no idea why. The only hope I had was to get a transplant, and that he would do his best to get me on a transplant waiting list. And he went on to explain that that was my only hope. No guarantee that I would get a transplant, or any assurance that I could even get on the list, or even live day to day, but they would do their best, he said. Well, the next evening, my brother-in-law came for a visit, and as he was leaving, he turned and he said, "Bob, you're in my prayers to get better." Well, my wife sprang from her chair. She said, "Don't pray he gets better. Pray he gets a transplant." And Al stood there dumbfounded as Marie told her, there's this imbalance between the need for organs and the availability. And the only way you can get an organ transplant is to be at the top of that list, and that's the sickest person at the time that that organ shows up. If you have him sent home now, he'll just be lying there, jaundiced and green and bloated and in pain and probably kind of swirly in the head, just waiting for a phone call. And Al just stood there dumbfounded, listening to all this, trying to take it in. And as I lay there in the bed observing this scene, I realized I hadn't just entered a hospital, but I had entered a whole new world. Well, I was one of the lucky ones. Due to the great skills of the people at UCLA, the surgeons, the staff, and through the generosity of an unknown donor family, I received a liver transplant 2 weeks later. 6 months later, when my wife finally took me home to stay, she brought me home to a very modest apartment, and I had no idea how I was going to pay the rent. We had lost our home, the business, all of our assets, and maybe most difficult of all, because I had lost the ability to earn a living. I have an MBA with a major in finance. I have decades of experience in business and investments. When I got home, I found I couldn't do basic arithmetic. Well, 2 years, a lot of hard work, and a lot of failed job attempts later, I got a job as a salesman. And I earned my way up to being a top 1% producer in a group of several hundred salespeople. Life was good again. And maybe the best part of it was I now had 2 new people in my life. Alexandra, my first granddaughter, who's now age 11, and Katie, my grandson, now age 9. They're the apple of my eye and an inspiration to me every week. Life was really good again until that liver started to fail about 10 years later. And once again, I found myself in the ICU at UCLA for a few months, waiting and hoping. And once again, the miraculous minds and hands of that UCLA staff and yet another donor family gave me both a liver and a kidney. And once again, I found myself then at age 65, financially and physically ravaged. To put it in perspective, I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall, and at that point I weighed 110 pounds. My financial situation was in about the same condition. Now fortunately, as I realized I was going to be going through yet a second transplant, I made a determination that I'm going to figure out, I'm going through this twice, there must be some lessons to be learned here, and I'm going to share them with people when I get out of it. As soon as I could, I went back to school, got educated and trained as a life coach, and now I have a professional practice, and that's the way I support our family. I dedicate a lot of my time on a volunteer basis to working with transplant patients and their families in crisis through the Clinical Services Department at UCLA, as well as doing public speaking whenever possible to raise the awareness of the need for organ donation. I've lived a lot higher lifestyle than I do now, but I've never had a better quality of life that I'm experiencing through my endeavors today. And a day does not go by that I don't give thanks for those brilliant people at UCLA, all the friends and family that supported me through this, and those yet still unknown donor families who gave me the gift of life. Now you and I and each of us in this room are part of a special group. We sometimes refer to it as the transplant world. This is a unique world because it's a world where hope, generosity, transformation, and inspiration come together every day. Now, in a day in your life, you have tremendous personal loss and stress. And on that day, you said yes to donation and gave the hope of life to another. My wish for each of you is that you will find the greatest healing in the act of your giving, for you have forever changed the life of those recipients and their loved ones around them. And that's what makes me excited to be here today, to be able to say to you our gratitude, not just from me, but from all transplant recipients and for all people on the waiting list, because what you have done gives them hope for the future. And to say to you, in a wholly inadequate but deeply heartfelt thank you. It has indeed been an extreme privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today.